right, welcome back to Chainmakers, where we sit down with people actually building Web3 founders, product leads, and community operators shaping crypto native projects from the inside out. I'm Brittany Lachlan, chairman at Stacks Foundation, and today I'm joined by Gardo Martinez, senior product manager at Pip Labs, but you might be more familiar with Story Protocol. He's also one of the core contributors behind Story Network. He's worked at Google, he's worked at Coinbase, he's worked with Eco and Base, and now he's building AI native infrastructure that blends intellectual property and decentralized systems. So today we're diving into what product led growth looks like in Web3 and how the next wave of crypto onboarding might come through the convergence of AI, storytelling, and IP. Guardo, welcome to Chainmakers.
Hi, Brittany. Good to be here. Thanks for having me and good to see you again. Hi, everybody.
Yeah, so we got to meet in person at ECC last week in Cannes. So I've already gotten some preview to what this conversation is, but I am very excited, not only because there's so much that you're learning here today, but also because there's some exciting announcements that we will drop as well coming out of Story Protocol. But before we get into that, I would just love to start with some of your background. So, you've gone not only through a crypto journey, but you've also come from military. So you've gone from like submarines to Solana type infrastructure. What's the through line of your journey of kind of evolving from, a leader in the military to working now in product?
Yeah, for sure. It's a great question. I often joke that I have a very scatterbrained LinkedIn, but I'm glad that you asked what's the through line because I feel like there definitely is one. And at its heart, I think that through line is typically I love solving problems. And that's something that I've always been interested in, whether it was like Legos as a little kid, trying to build the thing without just looking at the picture, not looking at the instructions. I've always had like an interest in just like figuring out tricky things that need to be solved and figuring out interesting ways to solve them. I think that really, I learned a lot of that in my time in the military, working on submarines, working on reactor plants. There's like a lot of crazy situations you can kind of find yourself into and have to be able to react quickly and like think methodically. And we're big on frameworks in the military, which I think, we call them procedures, right? But it's functionally frameworks. And that, lend itself really nicely to my kind of like corporate career, if you will, working in product and working in strategy. And I think that's really the through line is just like strategy all the way throughout, specifically focused on product strategy. Even further down to like, how do we help leverage a strategy to like not only build the right next thing and why, what's the highest leverage next thing to build, but also how do we do that in service of whatever our business goal is, usually some sort of growth related endeavor, getting more users, moving a number, whatever that may be.
I love that. And I'm just curious, like what brought you into crypto of all places though? Because like you kind of apply that to so many diverse things. What's the thing that, either brought you to crypto or what's kind of like getting you excited, keeping you in crypto now? What's the problem you're solving?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So I think, at its most philosophical, I think, I guess I'll start here. So I'm a first generation American. I'm of Cuban descent. So both my parents, are Cuban immigrants. They met in the US and I was born here. But as a function of that, conversations of economic freedom, governance, ownership, these are like central conversations to my upbringing from like a very, real kind of firsthand sort of accounts, my family that, went to bed with money and woke up without money and like what that looks like and just like, what ownership means to me. And like, we always had these conversations, but they were always in a almost reactionary type of way, like keep your head on a swivel and make sure nothing crazy is happening, vote, and get out of there if you can't, I get that kind of thing. So fast forward a number of years, my buddy, sends me the Bitcoin white paper. I start reading that. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And then the further I get down the rabbit hole and talking to friends that were building in a space, our friend Daniel, who introduced us, getting me more into it. And just really, I had my aha moment where I was like, oh, this is a fundamental escape potentially from like the exact sort of financial like zero sum games that we often live in, where that resulted in my parents exiling from one country to another. We could build a place that like literally reshapes that sort of these kind of like antiquated sort of like social and economic structures and build something new where all ships can rise in the tide and people can benefit more positively together from things like co-ownership, new economic models, etc. Literally my upbringing is very much what kind of fueled me to come to crypto and stay into crypto. And I think, while the EU, I can scratch that sort of strategy itch in a number of different arenas. I worked at Google for a number of years in our ads business. And I think there's ads have their place in the internet, provides internet for a lot of people. That's cool and all that. But it just like wasn't getting me out of bed as quickly as working in crypto has. That's for sure.
Yeah. So maybe you can give a little background on what you did at Coinbase, and then I want to hear about the work that you're doing at Story.
Yeah, for sure. So, I guess first foray into crypto was at a crypto startup, still around called Eco Payments Protocol, focused on like stablecoin movement. They're doing a great job there. At the time, we had a consumer crypto facing app that we were building, and I was working on that. From there, I ended up going to Coinbase. Was the first external PM hired on the base team, which is a lot of fun. Learned a lot there, moving from like what I would have considered more consumer crypto into more like the protocol side, and a lot of focus on like developer onboarding there. If we're going to bring, if Base is focused on bringing, 1 million builders, building users. How do we get those people on? How do we solve their unique problems, address those unique situations? And those two things, kind of like the consumer side and the protocol side, really have served me well in my time coming in as being the first PM hire at Story, where it's both, we are building a very IP, intellectual property specific tech stack, from the chain to the protocol that sits on top of it, the legal layer that operates within it to make everything go. It's both those things are crucial there. The necessity to understand, what is it at a foundational level that this protocol needs to do and why does it need to do those things? And also who is it serving it for, right? Because we don't just want to, build the infrastructure, and we do have a thriving ecosystem and apps are being built on top, but we also want to, internally show the power of what this is capable of doing. So, who is this being built for? Why are we building this in service of? And I'm sure we might get to this at some point later if we start geeking out on product a little bit. But something that I think I mentioned when we last met was like the best products are built at the intersection of business value and user value. So that's constantly what we're looking at is like, obviously, we want to solve real problems. We have hats at the company that say like, what actual problems do you solve? Which I think is not just a crypto specific problem that we don't do that, but that happens in a number of industries where you kind of like lose a plot a little bit about what it is that you're trying to accomplish, but also rooting that in like solving problems for people and what those people need, and not just building, not just a roadmap that's just like a bunch of hunches that are just like a feature list, something like that, but building things that will meaningfully help people in a way that will also drive our business outcomes, which, if we're going to keep solving problems, we got to keep the lights on, of course.
Yeah. Well, I want to hear about that now. Like, how do you know that you're actually providing the value? Is it like a lot of research up front? Is it testing? Or like, if someone's listening to this and they're like, yes, I want that. I want to be able to answer that, question on the hat. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say I'm a huge believer in product discovery, customer interviewing. Two of my favorite kind of product thinkers, Marty Kagan. If you're in product and haven't read Inspired, would definitely recommend you pick that up. And also Teresa Torres on the product discovery front. She has a book called Continuous Discovery Habits, which is just a phenomenal sort of, how-to on, not only like rooting yourself in proper discovery, but making sure that like, a set of frameworks that make sure that you're still building at the intersection of business value and user value and really accomplishing both those things. From a very tactical standpoint, I would say grab one of each grab those books if you're in product, and if you haven't read them, and definitely read through them. They're absolute game changers for how you should think about things. But, I think that's only part of the equation. Frameworks are only part of the equation. I think the way Teresa defines an opportunity in product is an unmet user need, pain point, or desire. And that informs what we refer to as the opportunity space. And then we can figure out what the highest leverage opportunities are to try to build that will ultimately drive whatever our business objective is, whether it be more users, revenue, et cetera. But it should always be rounded in like, there is a business objective. There is a user journey that people will go through that will drive that objective. What are the things that are in the way? How can we make that better? And the opportunity space should not, again, just be hunches from like what I think users will need, what our founders think users will need. These should be informed by lots of like user conversations, input, prototype testing. There's lots of different ways to get signal on these things, but the signal should be coming from who you're building for, not just from who's building it, which I think is a trap that a lot of people, crypto and not, happen to fall into a trap.
And what's the, how do you know if, especially if you're developing in a new space, like that there is, where are those users? Like, how do you get to them? Because I think this is often a problem in crypto too, is people know that there's a problem, like a meta problem, but knowing who's going to actually use and adopt this is very different. So was there anything you've learned at Story or through Coinbase that like here's the trick, here's the hack and how you actually get in front of the customers?
Yeah, I would say I guess I'll break that down into a couple of different things. I would say it's a little different on if you're doing discovery in service of improving an existing product, and also discovery in service of creating like a zero to one type of product. Because if you already have a product that's getting some amount of usage, etc., you obviously still want to talk to users. That's great. Hope you have some users already and you can use them to refine the opportunity space and figure out what's highest leverage there, so that your roadmap isn't just what you think should be built next. But particularly on the 0 to 1 side, which is what most of the crypto landscape is, I think the methods are similar insofar as I highly recommend like a strategic sort of like scientific approach, right? Like I have a hypothesis. Let's test that hypothesis in some way. And then based on that, we'll keep it moving, or we'll just inform the new hypothesis and go and test that. Failure is just learning, right? And I think that will help a lot. I think the scale of it is different and a little trickier on the 0 to 1 side, because often you're looking into a market, right? Like understanding, like I have a hypothesis that this is a need from, in this market, right? And then you have to go out and validate that. And you almost will certainly, your first hunch will be wrong, right? Or it'll have like some bits that are correct, some bits that were a little far off. But, it's important to just be like, all right, this is the hunch I have. Let me go inform that to some degree and then, pivot accordingly and have more conversations. And I think something that you touched on, which is really interesting and definitely difficult on the 0 to 1 side, is who do I talk to, right? I think there are a number of things like, no shade to chat GPT, deep research, things like that. Like there are a lot of ways to get signal on things early, but there's no substitute for that does not absolve you of going out and talking to who your your end user would be, right? Regardless of how 0 to 1 it is, you have an idea of what that one might look like. Who's that problem? Like there is a problem that should be addressing. Who is that problem? Like who has that problem? Go find them and talk to them, and then use that to inform the opportunity space and understand if that's an actual problem we're solving. Is it difficult? Is it, learn more about it from there? But it should always go back to talking about a problem that needs to be solved, understanding if it's a problem we're solving, and that can only be done by talking to the people who are currently experiencing that problem and understanding if this is better than the alternatives. Because I think that's something that, again, both in crypto and not, we find ourselves, there's often, especially in crypto, I'll say that, where people are just like, oh, this is just better than what exists. So people will just do it. And people are not the just do it type. It really needs to be like meaningfully better in order for somebody to make a change from Web 2 to Web 2. Now you're talking about wallets and onboarding and things like that. Forget about it. It needs to be so much better. So, you really got to go back to like that developing that discovery muscle and talking to people to refine things and making sure that you're walking in the right direction, course correcting a lot.
Yeah. And is it just constantly doing some of this customer research? Because, we've heard, on the podcast, someone else that's also said a similar sort of thing. Oh, you just got to go talk to people, which seems fine in theory. But I think a lot of PMs think of like, okay, well, I have to build product. I have to ship things and develop new timelines. And even for things like infrastructure, it might take months to actually deliver the real product that you're kind of testing. So, what does that actually look like in practice? Are you kind of coming back to the same users? Are you running Google ads to like attract those users, going to conferences?
Mm.
Like what's like the tactical playbook? Like you have 6 months, you got to go talk to users. Like where are you finding them? And how do you keep that process going?
Great question. So yes, long story short, yes, constantly be talking to users. Teresa Torres, who I mentioned before, recommends at least having one conversation with a customer weekly, which makes a lot of sense. Type of conversation you have will depend on like where you are, what you're trying to do discovery on. But you should always have your fingers on the pulse, because once they're off, the roadmap starts getting really hunchy again. So definitely recommend that continuous sort of cadence of discovery. I would say that like there is that tension, or that perceived tension at least, of just like if I'm doing discovery, I can't be doing delivery. And those things I think in a lot of people's head are mutually exclusive, but they really shouldn't be. One, like continuous discovery should feed into continuous delivery. And I think the way that you can tactically accomplish that is by one, not testing the whole idea at once. Like don't build the whole thing, because then you're testing a bunch of assumptions all at once, and it's all hard. If it fails, it'll be hard to know exactly why it failed. And if it succeeds, same idea. So don't test the whole idea. You can learn very quickly. I think people say, use the term fail fast, or like, move fast and break things. But too often they like build something, the whole thing, and test the whole idea. There's this concept of assumption testing. Shout out to Teresa. Great. But the idea that instead of testing a whole idea, every idea is built or propped up by certain underlying assumptions. So, for example, if I'm building an NFT marketplace, like let's say I have an app that has a bunch of users and I want to build an NFT marketplace, and I'm like, oh, I have a bunch of users, I want to build an NFT marketplace, I'll just do it, and then the users will start using it. There are a number of assumptions in there, such as, there is an assumption that my current user base will want to use NFTs. There's an assumption that if they are NFT users, they'll want to use my NFT marketplace versus what they're already using, right? And these are all assumptions that you can de-risk without having to build anything at all. You can very quickly run like a 1-question survey with your users and be like, have you purchased an NFT in the last 30 days? And that'll give you signal into the desirability of that alone without having to build an NFT marketplace for months or a year or whatever, and then throw it out and then realize that they don't use it. Things like that. And I ran these things all the time at Base. For example, like we built like the base.org site, launched that, and we had a sinking suspicion that it was mostly like end users, kind of like retail users that were using it rather than developers. And we ran a really quick, and that was an assumption we had. So all of the content, et cetera, was focused very much on like the retail user, investor kind of thing. And through a 1-question survey up there, have you deployed a smart contract in the last 30 days? Turned out like 60% of people that were coming through were active smart contract developers, things like that. So with that signal, you can take that. Now we're adjusting the website a little bit, things like that. So that's, I guess, what I would go down to is like don't test the whole idea. You break it down into underlying assumptions that idea rests upon, and then you could validate or invalidate those really quickly. You don't have to test every assumption. Basically, there's some assumptions will be more important than others, and there will be some assumptions that you have supporting evidence or don't have supporting evidence. And those ones that end up in like these are really important and I have no evidence to support it, get evidence about those as quickly as possible, however you can, and try to just move those over. Because, again, nothing will guarantee that your idea will be right. But as a product leader, it's all about how can I de-risk this idea before building the whole thing and wasting a engineering team's time as much as possible, right? And there are a number of risks, usability, desirability, feasibility, all these kinds of things that you can work with your engineering leads and design leads to kind of like de-risk those. But I think at its core is like, will somebody use this? Like what will make this fall apart? And I think assumption testing helps you identify a lot of those things early on and realize, are these leap of faith assumptions or are these like things we can live with? So, and you can test 10, 15 assumptions in a week without having to like actually build anything beyond maybe like a Figma prototype.
Yeah. Engineers love hearing you say this. So come with, don't go build this. We know this much about it that now we can go build it. So it's good advice. Okay, so let's switch gears to Story. Tell me, what is Story up to? What have you been working on there? And like I said, I know there was a new announcement. So tell us about the Story meta and then the new stuff too.
Yeah, for sure. So I started working at Story early this year, late January. So I've only been there for about 6 months, but startup years feels like forever. So I got here during the time right before mainnet and token launch, which we're now referring to as Story Chapter 1, which I bring up because, as you mentioned, there's an announcement today where it's referring to as Story Chapter 2. So nice. I'll set that up for later. And Story Chapter 1 was very much about, the infrastructure, right? We had a problem space that we were trying to tap into, which is the problem space of intellectual property. The intellectual property is moving very quickly. The way at which ideas are being created and monetized, especially in an age of AI, is moving more quickly than ever. You don't need to know how to code anymore. You don't need to be a graphic designer to make graphic designs anymore. Like, this is crazy stuff. The pen and paper IP system is just not capable of keeping up with this sort of scale. And a lot of what, IP kind of arguments come down to is like, who did what first, and was there permission to do this? So concepts like provenance and permissions are things that blockchains are very good at. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of where the idea was, like, can we build a blockchain specifically built to handle the graphing and like complicated parent-child relationships that are specific to IP, and also a protocol with precompiles enshrined within them that help you tap into a lot of like the IP needs that you have, like licensing, paying out royalties, managing disputes, things like that. So that was sort of the idea, is I build a general purpose blockchain, but with very much IP specific use cases in mind, and then build that generally, let the ecosystem, bring in ecosystem players, see how it goes, and then kind of adjust the roadmap from there. So chapter 1 was very much about getting the beginnings of the stack, a little generalized, but with an angle toward IP, and then see what we can learn from there. So that was kind of chapter 1. Moving into chapter 2 now is very much like, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, it's like we don't just want to build a tech, we want to show what it could do. So we've learned a lot through the discovery since we've launched, both in terms of what users, like IP power users, whether it be brands or legal teams, what have you, like how the IP like landscape works and how our current setup works and doesn't work for them. And also like kind of, where the puck is going, so we can kind of try to skate there and not, be surprised. And that's sort of where we're at with chapter 2, is like, here are the main 3 strategic pillars or applications that we're focused on. And, happy to dive into these a little, but at a high level, these are: 1, the data layer for physical AI. There is a ton of data that's out there that that's scrapable. And as such, people and AI companies aren't asking for a lot of permission. They're kind of asking for forgiveness when it comes up. Asterisk, there's a big need for physical data, whether it be for robotics companies, things like that, where, it's very hard to train a robot to like pick up a cup, for example. Mm-hmm. So you need like hours and hours and hours of video data, but you need, it needs to be clean, it needs to be well labeled, it needs to be accessible, and in IP, and be able to do that in an IP safe way, because it isn't scrapable. So you need to be able to prove that I have provenance, the ability to use this, all these kinds of things. So that's one kind of insight that we've learned over the last few months, is the need for a data layer for this physical sort of AI infrastructure and licensing for that. And that taps into our proactive licensing model really well. The second part of that is kind of the reverse. And this is something we've talked about at a philosophical level a couple of weeks ago, which is that for the scrapable data, things like that, that I mentioned before, there is a big desire and opportunity to get in what we were referring to as a retroactive licensing space. And, before I started at Story, one of the things that they talked about a lot was there was an AI song, was like the AI Drake and AI The Weeknd made a song together. I can't remember what it's called, but it was like number 1 on SoundCloud overnight, very popular. And what that resulted in was basically a takedown notice, and nobody on that value chain was able to monetize that at all. So the idea was, what if there was a way, if like Ideas just had their own API that you could tap into and like leverage those permissions to be able to use that. But I think what we've learned is that maybe going back to the sort of like assumption testing thing, I think that was built on the assumption that, most people in this scenario, like a scrapable data, if you want to call it that, are more likely to go for permission rather than forgiveness. And it seems like it's not actually the case, or at least not yet. Most people that's a huge, like in the case of that AI Weekend thing, had that person needed to pay a licensing fee, there's no guarantee of money on that. People are just doing it to be creative. So that probably would have been too high of a barrier to entry to get involved with that anyway. So it would have been much more likely they do it. And then from there, Drake and The Weeknd could be like, hey, saw you did this. Maybe there's a way for you to continue using this rather than issuing a takedown, and we can retroactively issue you a license in a way that we can continue to benefit from this on a go-forward basis. So both like a proactive licensing feature as one pillar for like these harder to get to kind of like physical data, non-scrapable data, and then also leveraging the proactive but also retroactive licensing component for a lot of this like scrapable data, where there's a huge interest in brands this is it kind of a number of different industries I've talked to on the IP side. I've always expressed some interest in like co-ownership with my fans, like increasing brand awareness, but also like fan loyalty, fan engagement, things like that. But there's never really a really good way to like tap into fan fiction or allow people to monetize their fan fiction or things like that. And we're hoping that this taps into that opportunity and the insight to allow this retroactive licensing to like truly help these people like not just, be fans, but partner together and things like that. So that's it on the licensing side. And then the third pillar, and this is like, if you've heard of our ecosystem app, Aria, they're focusing on music, but it's very much about like tokenizing intellectual property rights. So, further along the idea of just like, if I tokenize IP, can I actually have a part of this Justin Bieber song? And now I get streams and now I can actually make money from it, things like that. So going back to, you've talked a little bit about like product and crypto and non-crypto. I think this is something that's really interesting. It's not just working at a place that has tech that's specific for IP specific use cases, but what that functionally means and like, what it means to bring IP on chain and like actually become AI infrastructure for the internet. And I think that's something we've tapped into those insights over the last, since chapter 1, or like, how licensing plays into this in the future of IP. And also how can we create new economic models, both through a licensing aspect, but also through a tokenization aspect of IP, tokenizing, whether it be master rights or, remixing rights, et cetera, those kind of industry specific, but that's sort of like the 3 main pillars that we're looking at right now to try to cover the IP stack. And I'm sure we'll learn a lot between now and chapter 3, but that's sort of where we're at.
Yeah, I'm curious, like which area have you found the most customer adoption? Because I can clearly see the use case for creative collaborations and licenses there, but that sometimes they might require more education for people to know this exists and then be able to pursue this path, this retroactive path, versus maybe the physical AI. It's like there's clearly, robotics companies trying to train the robot. Like, are they actively looking for this? Is this the pain point for them? Or what pain points do you think are most, have resonated the most, like today? Obviously, those could change too.
Yeah, for sure. I think 2 come to mind, which is maybe cheating, but but I think there's like a
Fine,
one
fine,
on
we'll allow it.
the data layer for physical AI. I think that's something that there's like a huge demand for that in terms of, and there's a number of, companies that we've like, again, we'll talk more about this in the coming weeks, but there's a number of different companies, whether it be in the robotic space, et cetera, there's a huge demand for this type of data that's, again, clean, usable, and IP safe. And they just don't even know where to start to get it. So they're actually like, will kind of go and just like take what they can get in terms of data rather than be like, all right, I need 1,000 hours of people picking up a cup. They're just like, I need 1,000 hours of high quality video of humans doing things, and then those kind of work with what they got. So, creating the infrastructure to allow these companies that are like begging for this data and then, finding ways to incentivize people to create this data that they need is something that is a really, really interesting opportunity and something that we've gotten a lot of demand signal for, which we're very excited about. Similarly, on the retroactive licensing side, as I mentioned before, I've talked to like so many different brands from like in different IP areas, whether it be, and not necessarily just brands, but people that are working like scientific research and also just like movie studios, music studios, et cetera. And there's always this idea, maybe less so on the science side, but particularly wherever there's fans and like engagement, to figure out like how can we do like proper co-ownership? Because that's sort of like something that, go back to the NFT days, everybody was doing some sort of NFT based loyalty program to try to figure out like how does this make loyalty different, or using NFTs as like a cool kind of just like, hey, we're co-owning this, but you're really not, right? So pushing the boundaries on that to like, hey, all those things that kind of failed that you have a bad taste in your mouth, which is something we have had to get over with these people, is there's actual ways to tap into this now. And this so the demand is very much there for ways to try to partner with like people that are creating user-generated content, all these like viral moments out in the world. And like flipping this license model should enable like these major brands to like capture these like culturally important moments, et cetera, and just tap into them and be able to monetize them in a way that is beneficial for both them and the end user. So that's really exciting to me too, especially because there's real interest on the end user side too. We're working with an AI infringement detection company who right now we're already working with like a number of big brands, and they go out and find infringements for them and like send takedown notices on their behalf. And the overwhelming number of people that they reach out to ask like, is there a way to keep using it though? Like, do I have an option?
Yeah.
And more often than not, the answer is no. And that's because the amount of work that it would take to figure that out, is just non-viable for them, because they work, again, very pen and paper. They have legal teams to figure all this stuff out. So unless they're like already making a lot of money, it's probably not worth the squeeze. They're just going to take it down. And if it's just like a small number of use cases, it's not worth, like figuring it out. But if you start to scale like a lot of these infringements that are still commercially viable, and you can do that in a programmatic way, that, you don't need more teams and teams of lawyers to handle, that becomes really attractive to both sides of the equation. And I think, if you're familiar with Content ID on YouTube, they're kind of like they're YouTube's version of just like infringement detection within, it's just like intra-platform infringement detection.
Yeah.
And usually they'll send takedown notices or the ability to be like, hey, you can monetize this way. They have a similar sort of, you can send licensing agreements through the platform. And I think 90% of people already kind of like, set of people already play ball, if you will. when there's sent some sort of like notice. So there is a desire there for people to keep using what they're using. It's too difficult to figure out what the rules are first. But once you're in there, if you give me the rules to play by, brand safe, I can't do certain things, monetize it, I owe you X percentage, what have you, it becomes really viable for both sides. And I think that's something that's really been really interesting to me on both those licensing things, is like demand on the demand side, but also on the supply. There seems to be a lot of like interest as well, which is, you obviously need to make both of those go for it to be successful.
Yeah, well, we kind of talked about this before. Like, you can create new markets in the way that, growing up, you downloaded digital music for free because there was no place to actually get the digital music. So it's like a lot easier to find on BitTorrent because there was no Apple Music Store. There was no purchase a digital song for $1. So I think it's cool to think about what new avenues open up there. But I'm curious, like forward looking, you're sitting at the intersection of crypto, AI, IP. What do you think is like going to happen in 3 years? Like, are people just going to create more knockoff? Are they going to circumvent the brands in order to create the knockoffs? Or what are the things that you could imagine sort of happening maybe on the utopian, dystopian side of the intersection?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question. And I think like with any good technological advancement, that'll bring out the best and worst in people, right? You'll have like definitely a combination of those two. So I don't know exactly what it'll look like, but I think the last 6 months, 1 year have given us a flavor of just how quickly it could change. So I think while I don't know what it'll look like, I can almost say certainly it'll look different. And I think, as somebody who's like operating at the intersection of those spaces, I think, keeping the fingers on the pulse of what's happening is very important, but also playing on the balls of your feet, being ready to move, staying nimble is super important, and not overcommitting to like, hey, this is maybe, I'm a little preachy like to other startups, with just whether you're brand new or well capitalized or whatever, don't overcommit to what got you here. There are things that got you here, but like you have to be systematic, pragmatic, take new information, adjust accordingly. Otherwise, someone will blow right by you, understand the real insight, go get it instead. Or you'll just, again, end up just building hunches that don't actually scratch the itch that you needed to because you got left behind. So I think regardless of what it shakes out to be, I think there will continue to be a tension of who did what first. Somebody's screwing me, somebody, that kind of thing. There will always be sort of that tension. So I think with inherent to intellectual property, it will just kind of be like, how do we continue to create create opportunities where there could be mutually exclusive and mutually beneficial kind of situations that arise. So I think going back to like the philosophical thing, I think that's one thing that I'm a big proponent of in the industry, is that we can create new models where all ships rise in the tide, right? We can realign incentives in ways that like traditional capitalism hasn't done for us, right? Creating kind of like, somebody has to lose a little bit, and we can rethink that. And this idea of just like, I as just fan of whatever IP can now become a real partner with this IP just because I was doing the cool creative stuff I was going to do anyway. And in a way that's beneficial for me and beneficial for the brand. I don't feel like I'm getting squeezed by an IP that I love, a brand that I love, and the brand isn't trying to squeeze me. We're just like, they understand the benefit in what I'm doing, and now they have a way to capitalize on that, and I can capitalize on that as well. So I think continuing, again, I don't know exactly what it'll look like. I think it'll continue to get murky and fast. Mm-hmm. So whatever we could do to create these tools to, give people flashlights to navigate the murkiness a little bit, in ways that are beneficial for both sides of the equation, people that are creating IP and people that are leveraging the IP, will sort of be like what's necessary and why we need to keep our head on the swivel and keep going, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5 beyond this to like enable that to happen.
Right. So with Story, how can other people get involved in this? Is it just on the creator side? Are there developers who are building things? Obviously working in crypto, there's probably a lot of different types of customers, but how can people, if they're interested in this area, in this topic, like sort of hack away on these or like leverage the technology you guys have?
Yeah, for sure. So a couple things, if you're just interested at a high level on what we're working on, story.foundation is our website, and you can go on there, see our blog series, including the blog that came out today. Well, I guess maybe by the time this airs, came out like a little bit ago. And you can read through all that and see kind of like what we have top of mind and kind of like the story arc that we're developing, no pun intended, in terms of like IP management. And then also within there, you could find our docs for all of our tools. that if you are building on chain or you're familiar with like building on Ethereum, very easy. We have an EVM compatible chain. So if you want to move over to Story, you can. If you're looking to build an IP specific use case, please reach out to us. We also have like a vibrant Discord community, et cetera. And you can find all these links to our socials on story.foundation. And then if you're interested in just like seeing what the end user flow looks like and protections, you could use our IP portal, portal.story.foundation. And in there, you can register a piece of IP that, automatically brings with it the programmable IP license. So you have some sort of protections there. You can very easily get into a licensing agreement with another party that is, legally binding and enforceable in court, should you need to do that. And you can dispute it all, things like that. So we have, story.foundation for kind of like the high level, what's going on. If you're a developer, you can start using the protocol immediately to build something or just play around with it using our SDK and like the docs that we have right there. And if you're not a developer, the portal is very much kind of like the non-developer focus. You can play in touch with the protocol without needing to like use any code or things like that, and still take the benefits of it. So I'd say that those are kind of like the three main things. And our socials are all over there. So you can
check us out. And we'll make sure and link to those too. So with the portal, if someone is like a creator, are they sort of the best customer for the portal? Like if you generate art, if you're doing NFTs, or they're, who should show up there and kind of play with the IP? I'm like, I need to go make something so I can go use it.
Yeah. No, go on there, check stuff out. Maybe make a derivative of something, you mint a license. But yeah, I'd say like for the time being, the creators would definitely would benefit from using the portal most. Anybody who's looking to, get some sort of like on-chain provenance of like, hey, I created this on this time. Nobody can take that away from me because it's on chain now. Or I want to get into a contract with somebody and I just don't want to hire lawyers and know exactly how to do that. Go on chain on the portal, just register it. And now somebody can use your Instagram posts for marketing because you could just quickly spin up an agreement using our programmable IP license that way. So for at the kind of like smaller creator end user, that's a very good place to start. And we intend to I'm big on maintaining protocol parity, as I call it. So as the protocol continues to evolve, we want to make sure that for creators and non-developers that we have maintained the ability for them to leverage these kind of benefits, and the portal will continue to be the place for sort of like story management, if you will, things like that.
Yeah, I think it's very cool. And it comes back to kind of like your whole incentive of ownership. It's like you own something, have the rights to do it, have like a legal way to do it, which I very much agree with. Like that's sort of the promise of blockchain. And it's very cool to see it come to light. So is there anything else in the space that you're excited about, even outside of Story, that, is top of mind for you, or you're diving deeper into?
Yeah, I would say just more broadly, and I feel like I've heard this like at least a couple times a year for the last like 5 or 6 years, but like consumer crypto, I feel like is really get it. It's possible now. Like right now you can go on the portal and you can sign in with the Gmail and register your IP, and you don't need a wallet. You can sign in with your email and you don't need to pay for gas or anything like that. It all just happens in the hood. And these kinds of things, like, with the big account abstraction sort of like advances in the last like year or two, like we're getting to a place where we can make cool things on crypto that people will use and not know it's crypto because they don't need to. You know what I mean? Like I know everybody benefits from the internet. Very few of my friends can explain how the internet works. They don't have to. You know what I mean? And I think in many ways, I think it was Hayden from Uniswap mentioned that like blockchains are just servers on steroids. And I think that's awesome, but so much of what we've been doing for a number of different reasons has like the use cases have been just like moving value from one quarter of crypto to another quarter of crypto and like, things like that. Why can't I just use a server on steroids to build a cool app that, is different? And that could just be like a game. That could be, registering intellectual property on chain, doing licensing, replacing things that you might have done on like a DocuSign, on chain, whatever it is, but not having to know what's going on. I don't have to bring my own wallet. I don't have to fund a wallet. Nuts. Seed phrases, forget about it, So we're finally moving beyond that. And I'm excited to see like, it's almost becoming commonplace to have some sort of like social login now, which is great, where you don't need to like bring your EOA wallet or something like that. So as that continues to get, better on the user experience side, what people, and like obviously like how people will leverage this, these servers on steroids coupled with good UX to bring on new things. Because I think we've had like a lot of really cool ideas in the last few years, several bull runs that are just like, they were just a little too early. Like the cool ideas, just a little hard to use. And a lot of those things are like we can address a lot of those hard to use issues now. So I'm very excited to see kind of what pops up and what people start creating. I'm very excited for one of my normie friends to tell me about a crypto project before before I knew about it, and that without knowing it's crypto. I'm very excited for that moment. And I'm hopeful it's.
I love that as a benchmark. It's like, that's how we know we've made it. It's like, we're all going to make it if someone knows like of something that's not.
Exactly. Yeah. Like we just need like, fun stuff, cool stuff, practical stuff. Hackathons are amazing, but like, so often somebody will build like a derivative exchange in like an hour. It's crazy. Like they're like a few hours. It's nuts. But like my friends don't know what a derivatives exchange is. If you know what one is, you know how to use one. That's very cool, and this could be beneficial. But if you don't know, that's not going to be the thing that brings you on chain. What's going to bring you on chain is probably something a lot simpler. The first app I ever downloaded on the iPhone, like on the App Store, was like a little shotgun, and he was like went and it just made sounds, and I paid 99 cents for it. You know what I mean? But now, fast forward all these years later, I get my social, I connect all my banking information, like all these apps, but I needed some way to like dip my toe into crypto. So it's got to be something fun or something pragmatic, something real that people get real value from, not just something that requires a lot of just like, I believe in this, which is what belief has been what's driven us to this point largely. And now I'm excited for value to be what drives us to the next chapter.
Yeah. I feel like we almost had our moment with NFTs. A lot of people came in, but I do think it opened up the door at least to this idea that like crypto is more than just trade of money value. It's like creating new things that don't exist in the world and bringing them to new people. So I'm with you.
Totally.
I would love some cool apps. If anyone's listening and working on cool apps, send them our way. We'll beta test for you.
Yeah, got you. Happy to give you product feedback.
Awesome. Okay, so where can people find you online? Obviously, we'll send the links to Story, but what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so I would say follow me on Twitter. I'm on Gardo_Martinez on X, and I'll be posting a lot of like story and the occasional non-story, either crying about the Miami Dolphins doing things that I don't agree with, or UFC stuff, but like mostly story content and crypto content. So follow me on there, and if you have any questions about Story, or if you're looking to build on our chain, happy to help you out however we can. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, thank you so much for being on today. It was great having you, and we will send people to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Brittany, and thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye. That's a wrap for this episode of Chainmakers. Huge thanks to Gardo Martinez for giving us an inside look at product-led growth, decentralized IP, and how Web3 is merging with AI in all new ways. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to Chainmakers on Substack and Spotify, and be sure to share it with someone building a future of digital creativity. Thanks so much. Bye.